Good morning. I hope you guys are having a good day as we come back for another one of our mini messages, and we're going to be back today in Genesis chapter 15. We're picking up from the sacrifice that Abraham has made with the different animals and actually chopping them in half and laying the two sides over. As we talked about previously, this was how people in that world in that time made contracts. The two parties would both pass through it. So in Abraham's mind, in Genesis chapter 15, he and the Lord are going to pass through these animals as a sign of this covenant, this contract between them, that Abraham would possess this land, his descendants would possess this land, that he would have these descendants, all these things would happen. And so when you get down to verse 17, here's where it picks up. It says, after the sun went down and darkness fell, Abraham saw a smoking fire pot and a flaming torch pass between the halves of the carcasses. Excuse me. So the Lord made a covenant with Abraham that day and said, I have given this land to your descendants, all the way from the border of Egypt to the great Euphrates River. The land now occupied by the Kenites, Kenizzites, Cadmonites, Hittites, Perizzites, Rephites, Amorites, Canaanites, Girgashites, and Jebusites. A lot of ites hanging out in that area. Okay, so Abraham here was either still in this deep sleep that's talked about a couple of verses earlier, or he was kind of groggily coming out of that sleep. You know what I'm talking about? When you're kind of half awake, half not. You're almost kind of trapped in between. I mean, that's something that happens to me from time to time, and you're kind of trying to get yourself to wake up, but you kind of can't. Maybe he was in some state that was kind of like that. Now, God here represents himself as passing through this by a couple of things, by the flaming torch and the smoking fire pot. Now, this fits really well with how God presents himself throughout Scripture, right? God shows himself as being this flame, as being fire. We think about him at night leading the people of Israel as a pillar of fire, right? And then the day he was this pillar of cloud. There was the smoke that descended down upon the top of Mount Sinai when Moses was leading the people and they were receiving the Ten Commandments. So God shows himself like this constantly throughout Scripture. There's just certain ways that we can kind of see God, and fire is one of the ways that the Father is represented throughout both the Old Testament and the New Testament. So that's a very interesting part to this. And notice this, where it talks about there that he's making a covenant with Abraham. It says verse 18, so the Lord made a covenant with Abram that day. So the covenant is really interesting here because it's not made by both parties. It's made by God. Abraham never passed through. See, Abraham was incapable of keeping his side. So God didn't even have him pass through this. God did the work. And that's still true for us. I can never live up to the holiness God is calling me to. It's impossible. It doesn't mean I don't strive for it. It doesn't mean I don't try. It doesn't mean I don't try to excel. It doesn't mean I don't want to live the righteous life God's called me to. It just simply means that because of my sin nature, I'm incapable. And God understood about Abraham. So God did the heavy lifting. This is another example of God's grace in passing through this. So this covenant is based on not what Abraham can do, but what God can do. And God can always do exceedingly more than us. Have a blessed day.